Hi, David Ellenstein here, Artistic Director of North Coast Repertory Theater. Thank you for tuning in today to our theater conversations. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. That would help us out a lot. Thank you. It's my pleasure today to be joined for a theater conversation with my friend, the wonderful actor, Jacque Wilke. Hi, Jacque.
Hi, thanks for
I'm talking
having
to you.
me.
I'm talking to you. You're in Colorado, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. So those of you that come to North Coast Rep have seen Jacque Wilke many times, or if you go to other theaters around San Diego, you've probably seen her on those stages as well. We've been lucky enough to have Jacque on our stage most recently in The Outsider, playing Lulu Peaks, our political savant, as it were. And but Jackie's been in many shows at North Coast Rep, beginning with Don't Dress for Dinner, and even a dramatic play like The Father, and gosh, I'm forgetting so many, Unnecessary Farce, and Moon Over Buffalo, and I'm forgetting a bunch. We'll get to them in a minute. But you know her as an actor, but I thought it would be fun to find out a little bit more about her as a person too. Jacque, could you tell us where you're from and how you ended up in San Diego and all that stuff?
Sure. Originally, I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. My uncle was a sound designer for the Orpheum Theater, and he brought me into the sound booth and used to let me watch shows at the Orpheum Theater. And he told my mom, "You got to get this kid to do acting and do theater." So when I was, I think in second grade or third grade, I did a Christmas parade show at the Orpheum with, I remember, Dave Weber, who was the weatherman at the time, and it was a really big deal to be performing there. So I started doing theater around that age, and when I graduated high school, I got into the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in LA. So I moved directly from high school from Nebraska to the heart of West Hollywood, which was very fun. And I lived right in Melrose and Fairfax, right by Cantor's. I used to go there for lunch in between my classes, and had a great time. I stayed there for about 5 years. I did 3 of those years in school as well as performing in the company. And actually, I came down to San Diego because my brother was in law school. I came to visit, and I had found this website called, I think it's called the Actors Alliance of San Diego, something along those lines. It's no longer a thing, but I stumbled upon it on the internet, and Don't Dress for Dinner auditions were listed on there. And I remember I had no money at the time. I think my grandma gave me like $20 you had to sign up to be on the Actors Alliance website thing. So she gave me the money, and I auditioned, and that was my first show in San Diego, which luckily just kind of stumbled into North Coast Rep, which was, I attribute all of my success and connections to that first show. It had Phil Johnson was in it, who became like a father figure to me in San Diego as far as my career and comedy, especially in San Diego. Liesl Gorel-Getz, Amanda Sitton were the 2 women that were in it with me. And I mean, wonderful, wonderful women just to have as an initial welcoming to San Diego. Chris Williams, who I've gone on to do many, many shows with, who's just one of my favorite actors to work off of comedically. And who else was in it? Oh, Matt Thompson played my husband. He came in at the very end for maybe 2 minutes of a scene. And ever since then, you know, Matt and I have become really good friends. We've done another couple of shows together. It was just the greatest thing that I could have stumbled into. So I'm so grateful for it. And it was such a fun show.
Yeah, it really was. And it was so successful for us. We brought it back a second time, as I recall.
Yeah, that's right. We did.
Reassembled everybody. And Rosina Reynolds directed it, right?
She did, yes.
Yeah,
and I didn't know anything about Rosina, and my goodness, what a wonderful female director to get introduced to right off the bat. You know, I was terrified, but in a good way.
Yeah. It was a really, really fun show. So you said you saw shows at the Orpheum growing up. Which ones do you remember that affected you the most and said, "Oh, I really do want to do this"?
I remember seeing, I believe it was Annie that they had touring back. That would have been in the 90s. They also did a West Side Story, and I think he brought me in to see Carmen, which was
Interesting.
really neat.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it was just, they had all sorts of different types of performances that were in the theater, jazz musicians coming together and playing and stuff like that. So he was, more than I think he ever knew, a pretty big influence as far as pushing my parents, because I didn't come from a theatrical background at all. We never went to theater as a family. Nobody in my family is a performer. I mean, my dad was in his own right, but not actually, for money. So I think that having that little bit of a push to kind of get me involved into it, and that kind of set my course. And I knew from a young age that's just what I wanted to do. So I was pretty set.
So those are mostly musicals you mentioned, and I know you sing. You're a actor who sings well, but you don't call yourself a singer.
Right.
Why did you not go that route? Why did you end up going the route of an actor rather than a musical theater performer?
I think for me, it was a surprise to a lot of people because I did do so much singing in high school, in my high school years, in my earlier years. When I got to LA, there was a choice between campuses when I got into school. So I could have gone to New York or I could have gone to Los Angeles. And in Nebraska, you're kind of like, well, I guess it's warmer, like you don't have any idea what the difference between the two industries really is. And I didn't really have a mentor or anyone to kind of break it down and say, hey, wherever you decide to go to school, those are the connections that you're going to have, through the rest of your life. And I started doing a lot more film work when I was in LA because we were so much more focused on film. And I missed theater, and we didn't do as much musicals. And to be honest, it kind of just slipped through my fingers, the singing. And I started getting cast more and more in theater and dramatic roles and comedic roles. And it's an instrument, and if you don't keep your instrument sharp, it goes by the wayside a little bit. So I think that for me, the meat of a dramatic play and kind of developing myself as a more serious actor was the way that I wanted to go. And not to say that musicals aren't serious actors, but I wanted to dive deeper into enriching my skills that way than I wanted to go in and really dance and really, be a competitor in that way.
So I
yeah.
know that you are a impactful dramatic actor because you were in The Father that I directed. That's actually, I think, the only dramatic play I don't think I've ever seen you in other dramatic plays. So I know you've done a lot at other places. It seems at North Coast, you generally have been cast in very funny, great female comedic roles, and you've shined in them. What have you always been funny? Have you always been somebody that had a quick sense of humor and knew where the humor laid? And where does that come from in you?
I've always been comedically inclined, I would say. My father was one of 7, and he kind of was the comedian within his family, probably similar to yours. And when you grow up with a parent who is quick-witted and can do impressions and can physicalize things, I know nothing other than to say that I was raised around it, and I could see it at a young age, and I just imitated. And I think that lends itself to then seeing the rest of the world and being able to really specify things, how someone walks, how someone talks, the timing of it all. So I attribute it partially to just genetics and knowing my father, and if anyone who knew my father was larger than life and very funny. The other person who really picked me out at a young age and guided me was my English teacher. Her name was Carolyn Beery, and she was supposed to be a nun, but she said to her father, I will do anything to not have to be a nun. What is it? And he said, then you need to teach English. So she was one of the funniest, and I do think she kind of perfected my comedic timing. She brought me up probably 5th grade or 6th grade to speech and debate, and would work on comedic short interpretive monologues. I guess they're called something else, but I started doing those and competing when I wasn't even of age yet to be competing in junior high and stuff like that. And so she And she is responsible. There's about 6 or 7 pretty well-known TV actors and comedians, stand-up comedians, who also were taught by Carolyn Berry. And she was quite an interesting woman. And we went on, I used to do Friday Night Live with her and younger children. I was like her co-director, and we used to write sketch comedy and do summer camps. So part of it attributes to her as well for kind of guiding my way in comedy, I think.
Carolyn and Uncle Phil, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Phil Johnson.
we talked about Don't Dress for Dinner already. What are maybe 1 or 2 other shows that you would point to, not necessarily at North Coast Rep, that you have done that have really impacted you in a visceral way, that made you know that not only are you doing the right thing that you're supposed to be doing, but that it's important for the world?
I did a one-woman show called Happiest Place on Earth. And I'd never done a one-woman show before. And I was so terrified. And it was actually written by a man about his family. And Philip Dawkins is the writer, and he performed it in Chicago. But that story, because so many people have relationships to Disneyland, especially in California, and it was also a little bit of a history lesson as far as when Disneyland opened and all of the different types of, relationships that people have to memory and to their family. I have never been flooded with more personal letters, calls, people emailing the theater in response, and how they had such a profound response to that show. For me personally, I felt like the entire run, I was a little kid holding onto the side of the pool who didn't know how to swim. I was like, just make it through, because I've never done a show on my own before. And what a challenge, but it's also extremely exhilarating when you get over that hump and you're steering your own ship, and it is at the most, impactful. You are a storyteller. It's you and the audience. Yeah. And that is a relationship that I've always been able to kind of bounce off of other actors. I do a lot of farce work. I do a lot of, give and take, like an athlete. You pass the ball, you do this and that. And that is such a different experience in telling a story and really having them. You have to have them in the palm of your hand to capture them. So I'd say that.
Which theater was that at?
That was at Diversionary Theater about 2 years ago. Okay. Yeah.
And is there another one, another experience you had, maybe in a different way, that was profound or amazing or exhilarating?
Oh God, they all have their own.
Of course, yes.
Profound moments.
All our babies, right?
Yeah, of course, yes. I would also say it's a curse word in the title, so I have to be very careful. Stupid effing bird is what I'll call it. We did that at Signet Theater. That was also kind of just a magical experience as far as breaking open all the walls and having an ensemble piece that was, based off of a Chekhov play, but adapted and very raw and very contemporary. And it felt, I had a monologue at the, I played Mosh, and I had a monologue towards the end that Aaron Posner is the writer, and he writes about gun control and the state of Washington, D.C. and the actress, Mosh has got this big, juicy monologue. And I remember they had just had a shooting at the club in Florida, and it was it just resonated, and it was so powerful. And I was like, do I go there? And I didn't really show up and act that day. I just opened up my heart and I said, here you go, because this is what it is. Right. So that experience, it felt important. It felt like what we were saying, the show was important. The words were important. It felt really profound. Right.
So let's talk for a minute now about the last show you did, which is The Outsider.
Yes.
You played Louise Peaks.
Correct.
I was the director of that play, and we interviewed Paul Slade-Smith, the playwright. I think you said you watched that interview or watched some of that interview.
Yeah.
And we had, I'm going to speak for myself first. I had so much fun working on that play, not only because it was so relevant to the times that we live in now, but also because it was so funny. And because we had such a wonderful group of people in the room. You want to talk a little bit about playing Louise and working with those people?
Yes. Um, well, I think that what I loved about the play and what I loved about Paul Slade Smith is that he has this wonderful way of capturing people that are real people but have these eccentric characteristics about them, and so it's not far-fetched. Yes, it's a farce, but it didn't feel like that, especially for The Outsider. um Playing Lulu Peaks was great because she was so optimistic. I mean, there was never a moment where she went into a dark place, and you can't dislike a character like that. It's always positive, it's always fun, and it was just so much fun to. She just bounced off of the page. Like when I read it, I was like, oh, okay, I've got this, no problem. But I think what the most remarkable thing about that process is the cast that we had assembled, because as you know, David, being a director, not just in any play, but specifically for farce type work, comedies, you have to have that chemistry of a strong group of actors. And this group went through some extraordinary circumstances in the process of the show, with COVID-19 coming in at the end, and all of the different things that we kind of went through as a cast. And it was absolutely unforgettable. The timeliness of it, we thought like, oh yeah, we're doing this really important political piece. Like, little did we know that this was coming. You know what I mean? That the quarantines of time were coming. And it still is important, and it still is funny. And I think what was so powerful, and another moment I won't ever forget, is we were doing our show the last day, or Saturday night, we had a talk back. And that audience was like, half the size of the audience that we would normally have. And people were just so happy to laugh. And I think bringing laughter to people during hard times is something I know I can do, and I know I enjoy doing, and I know everyone else in that cast enjoyed doing. And I've never cracked up more in a rehearsal space. I mean, I'd never met John before, and I was like, when he came through the door as Ned, I was like, okay, I don't know if I can make it. I don't know if I can do the rest of the scenes with him, being that. So the rehearsal was helpful to not laugh because it was so much fun.
Right.
But yeah, it was a remarkable group.
That's John Seibert you're talking about, who played Ned Newley, the reluctant new governor, right?
Yes.
For those that didn't see the play. Right. So it was really fun. So now you're alluding to our COVID quarantine here. And here we are. You're supposed to be in our next play, which is Human Error, which is, again, a social comedy with political overtones. Very, very funny in a very different way than The Outsider was funny. And we are currently faced with bizarre times of what we're going to be able to do and how we're going to be able to do it. Talk for a minute, and maybe not specifically about that, but the life of an actor. And I mean, I was an actor for a long time before I was an artistic director. Talk about the nature of always looking for the next job, and what that lifestyle is like.
Well, there's something a little bit, you've got to be a little bit crazy to keep wanting to do it, right? I think if you could choose to do anything else in the world, you would. But there's something very thrilling about it, and there's something very terrifying about it as well. Especially for a theater actor, to try to find that next gig. So right now, if we're going to talk about the climate now, the excitement of knowing that you have something coming up that you're passionate about is just such a wonderful thing, because you can work a lot as an actor and not really care about the shows that you're doing. But I've been very fortunate enough to have a lot of plays and groups of people and projects that I'm so excited about. And particularly this year, I have like all these wonderful things lined up, and I'm like, what's going to happen? But what I'll say to it right now is that all the theaters around the country are taking online submissions, right? They want you to send in tapes. And it's just like, this is why I don't do film. I hate it. I hate it so much. And I still am getting to work a little bit right now and do some readings with some wonderful people and work on new projects, which is saving me, saving my sanity, and probably saving my relationship with my boyfriend, who's like, this girl's got to do something creative, otherwise she's going to lose it. But it's like you have to act to the camera, even when you're doing a reading. And I miss it. I miss just being able to work off of a human being, or walk into an audition room and greet people with a handshake, God forbid, and look them in the eye. And it's just it's so different. It's terrifying right now because no one knows. I have friends who were on Broadway who just had opened a show 2 weeks before this closed down, or a week before it closed down. People in San Diego who opened and closed the same day, and it's the uncertainty is now compounded so much, because it's like, not only do you know if you're going to get work, you don't know if you're going to get work for a while, and what that's going to be like. And I think that we have to find positives. We have to find creative outlets, and whether that means, painting, drawing, baking, coloring. The first few days I was literally connecting dots. That's what I was doing, because you have to be busy. And then eventually, for me, coming from the Midwest, extreme boredom actually makes me more creative. So I remember, growing up around at my grandma's farm and just looking at cornfields, and I would come up with some really good ideas. So yeah, I think that there's nothing wrong with that. The idle mind sometimes does create things. So we are getting more time.
All those things you listed, in my house, we're doing a lot of the baking part, which is which is not so good. But I mean, it's great, but it's not so good. Well, I'm like you. I'm all about live theater. I'm all about people talking to each other and people standing there witnessing it, not doing it the way we're doing it now, which is out of necessity. But, in this time, we have to be creative and think outside the box a little, even if it isn't optimum. It's something to do to keep us all engaged with the art form that we love.
Yeah.
So I hope it's sooner rather than later, Jackie. And we're going to talk about how we're going to go forward with human error, which is still developing. But I'm so happy that you did this today and let our audience get to know you a little bit beyond Lulu or Billy or the really fun characters that you've played on stage. I always love when you're in a cast because, not only are you a delightful person and a talented actor, but you're a professional, and you're on time, and you're prepared, and you are thoughtful in what you do, and you're easy to work with. And so I hope it's many times more.
Ditto. Thank you, David. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jackie.